Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, we are back live on the Investigative Journal on this Tuesday, September 12th, 2017 day on our calendar. And today I want to talk about yesterday, 9/11, and also Vatican atrocities again, and graves of dead babies being turned up. It's not a news story, but this will add to stories I've done in the past. And then, of course, the powers that be, yes, that be, want to bring back the draft. Isn't that interesting? And you girls that are fighting for equality, you got to go too. Maybe it was better the other way around. But anyway, I was in the first lottery during the Vietnam War, so we'll talk about that as well. But why don't we start out with that infamous day in history, 9/11, my birthday in 2001, and something big happened on that day. I had to take a sip of water before I get started here. But you know something? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And that's exactly what 9/11's all about. And I wanted to wait to the day after and watch the mainstream media tell the same lies over and over again, knowing their lies, knowing a lot of people in America know their lies, but that's their story, and they're sticking to it. It's almost like a fairy tale when you understand exactly what went on that day, and all of the anomalies, and all of the craziness. But the powers that be had a story, and they've stuck to it now 16 years. Every year they do the same thing. They never change it, even though it's been proven to be full of holes, bigger than any piece of Swiss cheese you ever picked up. We're not going to go over each and every fact that didn't make any sense. And it's almost as if many people realize it's not true, but as the years go by, the truth fades away. And the more years that go by, their stupid story, just like their stupid story with Kennedy, with Abraham Lincoln, with even the formation of our country, sticks like glue to every blackboard in every university, high school, grade school, whatever school. And the Jesuitism and their lies and deceit rule the world. Now, when you try to trace 9/11 and the perpetrators, you go to the main people in power, and then, of course, you just drive a little bit over to Georgetown University, and the masterminds there helped them put this together. They've been planning 9/11 for I don't know how many years prior to it. I don't know if you were ever in that building. I was a number of times, and then spent 2 years on and off in New York researching 9/11. And I came to my own conclusion. Whether you believe it or not, I could care less if nobody believes it or 100 million people believe the government story was a lie. I know for a fact that it was. So today I want to read something to you. I was sent this by a Gary G. Coles. He's an MD out of Duluth, Minnesota. And he's going to remind us about 9/11. And he gives us a quote here by Bob Dylan. "You've got gangsters in power and lawbreakers making the rules." And that's from a song he did named "When You Gonna Wake Up?" Yeah, people aren't going to wake up. You're in a deep sleep here. And let's read what Joseph Stalin had to say. The easiest way to gain control. Now remember, Joseph Stalin was trained by Jesuits at a seminary called Tiflis in Russia. And he might as well have been a Jesuit priest, and I call him Father Joseph Stalin. And I have facts to back it up. And I've done shows on it. Now you wonder why I can't work in the mainstream. Or you can't even work on the alternative in the bigger stations to make a buck, because those are controlled by the same people. So the easiest way, Stalin said, to gain control of a population is to carry out acts of terror. The public will clamor for such laws if their personal security is threatened. See, they taught Joseph Stalin well. A lie told often and often, this is by Joseph Goebbels, another Catholic Vaticanite, and the Nazi Minister of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment was the name of that government organization in the Nazi Party. He said a lie told often enough, people will believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself. That's what's happening with 9/11. Now, what did he went on to say? If you tell a lie big enough, okay. And he went on to say this: the lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and the military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent. For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. That's why the truth isn't here, and we have a Nazi government. They adhere to what he said. The rank and file. He goes on, and it's worth listening because you only hear what Goebbels had to say, that first quote, lie told big enough, the bigger the lie, the better the lie, all that. But he said the rank and file is usually much more primitive than we imagine. Tell me about it. I got to tell you a story. I was doing a story about Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who was head of the Vatican Bank right after he died. And his godson contacted me because I thought Marcinkus, he was going to give me an interview regarding the Vatican Bank scandal. And his godson contacted me and said something, and we had long conversations. He says, Greg, don't get on the Vatican. What are you doing with this Jesuit Vatican story? He said, you got a great voice. We could get you a job in entertainment. You shouldn't be going down this road because the American people don't care. They will abandon you in the end, and you will be poor, and it's not worth the trouble, even though it is in your mind, he said. Now, he said in your mind the truth. He could have said the truth, and then he would have put himself on the hook. But, I look back, and he's right. So who's stupid? Who's smart? You answer that. The rank and file is usually much more primitive than we imagine. Propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. Hey, it was the Arab terrorists that came in there with the airplanes, blew up these 2 buildings, everything happened there. What couldn't have been a controlled demolition? The simple story the masses will believe. The most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over again. And that's what happened just yesterday. If you listen to every mainstream report, they went from Shanksville to the Pentagon to the 9/11 towers and the same stories. Then, it is just incredible. They don't change, but you know what? Their strategy works, apparently. It isn't that U.S. foreign policy is cruel. This is William Blum from Rogue State, A Guide to the World's Only Superpowers. It isn't that U.S. foreign policy is cruel because American leaders are cruel. It is that our leaders are cruel because only those willing to be inordinately cruel and remorseless can hold positions of leadership in the foreign policy establishment. It might as well be written into the job description. I put this, yes, if you're not willing to lie, you can't be president of the United States. People capable of expressing a full human measure of compassion and empathy toward faraway, powerless strangers do not become president of the United States, or vice president, or secretary of state, or national security advisor, or secretary of the Treasury, nor do they want to. William Blum from the Rogue State. And what did James Dresden say? Former journalist, remember? When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses, the truth will seem utterly preposterous, and its speaker a raving lunatic. Now, I remember when I crossed over into the alternative media and didn't really understand that the Genesis and Alex Jones and all those people, John Statman, were all working for the other side. I was very headstrong and talked about the Jesuits the way they should be talked about, and these people, Alex Jones, started saying, this guy's a raving lunatic. So I guess Mr. Dresden was right. Now Voltaire, way back when, now he worked for the Jesuits, by the way. Those who cannot make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And he criticized them. That's their strategy as well. And we've gotten into that side of it. And there's a few out there that do that today. Now, David Talbot, author of The Devil's Chessboard, said this, and it's the full title is Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of American Secret Government. Now, you got to know that Allen Dulles, one of the Dulles brothers, is also a bishop as a Jesuit. Okay, we've gotten into that story before. Whistleblowers can expect to be ignored and attacked by the disinformation specialists of various stripes who will use specious reasoning, lies, and any small weaknesses in the whistleblower's style or sourcing to dismiss their essential truths. First ignore, and if that doesn't work, then attack, is the modus operandi of the propagandists who populate the mainstream media, and I'll add most of the alternative media. When a whistleblower has the guts to expose corruption in the highest levels, he can expect blowback from media and academic spokesmen and the deep state, and you can bet that's directed by the Jesuit order. That's where they learned it. Paul Craig Roberts, we'll pass by him. What did Franklin Roosevelt, we'll pass by what he said, because he was one of them. And here we go. This is by Mr. Coles, an MD. He wanted this read. That's a decent article. Well, it's that time of year again, ever since 9/11/01. Don't you know it? That was my birthday. I remember when I woke up in that morning. Ruined the whole thing, and they've ruined everyone since. Okay, I'll get back to Mr. Coles here. Everybody in a position of political power, military power, or economic power in the U.S., and their lobbyists, paid and unpaid trolls, and assorted hangers-on will again be trying to ignore, deflect, or misdirect the overwhelming evidence that proves to the unconflicted person. That's the problem. We don't have many unconflicted people in this world. At least those who have no ulterior political or financial motives, that the official White House conspiracy theories first concocted by Cheney-Bush administration back in 2001 are he says probably false. I'll say are false, not to mention treasonous. And they did it yesterday again. That's why I waited till today. And what is worse is that the crimes and the subsequent cover-ups of the crimes that were perpetrated on that day are largely to blame for the illegal and ill-advised U.S.-led killing operations that have generated millions of innocent deaths, billions of cases of physical and mental suffering among the war refugees in the Middle East, Europe, and North Africa, and trillions of squandered U.S. taxpayer dollars that now make it impossible to pay for everyday 100-year climate catastrophes, or can we say man-made catastrophes? I'll add that, like hurricanes Harvey and Irma. As long as the lawbreakers are making and enforcing the rules in D.C., and may I add, as long as the Jesuit order is allowed to keep Georgetown right next to the White House. In most of our state capitals, these all-American crimes and cover-ups will go unpunished, thus allowing the criminals to cavalierly reoffend at will. And I will add, they'll kill again. And it should go without saying that without justice there will be no peace, no healing, no reconciliation, and zero, of course, no reparations. That's what the Jesuits want, my friends. He's right there. The following evidence is again offered in support of the allegations in this column about 9/11 Hopefully the principles learned from America's self-inflicted acts on that infamous day will help to demystify some of the other big lie myths from America's sordid past history that have become nearly impossible to expose or overcome. Those myths include, well, we can go on and on. I mean, I've got my own list that it goes, it's bigger than my arm. But he says Wall Street military misadventures, frauds by Wall Street, crisis, crashes, toxic mine tailing spills, every cover-up toxic chemical oil refinery spill, every cover-up pipeline, every cover-up act of corporate fraud and bailout. And we could go on for the entire show. False flag terrorist events. Assassinations out the you-know-what. And the main contrast between the above catastrophes and what happened on 9/11 is that the obvious controlled demolitions of those three towers on that same day would not have been as history-changing than just letting two jets stay embedded in the two twin towers. Experts say that in all likelihood the two planes were unmanned military drones, and that allowing them to be examined intact would have been easily exposed, so that the evidence had to be destroyed beyond recognition, or else no mobilization for war could have occurred. Whether that theory is right or wrong, there's so many out there. We know that it was a demolition, and we know it was set up by the inside people. That's what I say. What is most important for people to understand, says Dr. Coles, is that the inane prevailing theories about how those three steel-reinforced concrete towers were demolished by burning, pancaking, or that a single weakness of one of the scores of columns in WTC-7 could cause that tower to collapse are so far-fetched as to be laughable. Instead, the NIST failed to even consider the only plausible explanation for the sudden collapse, a controlled demolition by pre-planned explosive devices. Debunking government and industry trolls who ignore the unbiased science of the only way that the steel-reinforced skyscrapers can be brought down into their own footprints have been emboldened by the complicity of the major media and are not to be trusted, only pitied and refuted. And I said this a long time ago. If they could lie about that, my God, they'll lie about anything. I wouldn't believe one word that comes out of any Jesuit's mouth or any person that runs is the head or in charge of anything in government. Anybody. The latest and most comprehensive analysis of the important scientific evidence that totally debunks Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld, White House conspiracy theories comes from a number of people. And we won't go over all of that information. But many people have gotten to the truth of 9/11. I rather enjoy going to Phil Jahan's. Just Google Phil Jahan, Jayhan. He's one of the more credible people. You can go to people like Fetzer and others. Those, I don't know. Not as credible to me. WTC Building 2 exploding into dust by a pre-planned explosive device. The arrow points to a squib of exploding gas exiting a window. I mean, we can go on. The section steel beams. Sky, embedded. It almost gets to a point. I remember going over this right after 9/11, a couple of years later. I did it. And to do it every year and then to know that it's going one ear and out the other, and this official BS story will live in the history books long after we're here, is very sickening to think about. Now, below, he says, is a short list of few absurdities that the Cheney-Bush White House, and if you've forgotten, it's been 16 years of lies and deceit and cover-ups, and people who get close to it get ridiculed or killed. That's what we're up against. But this is thanks to the massive Pentagon, FBI, big media support has managed to get millions of gullible Americans to believe, thanks to Joseph Goebbels' big lie propaganda principles, taught to him by Jesuit priests. He was a Catholic in the Nazi Party. 1. On the morning of 9/11, 19 Arab Muslims outwitted the most sophisticated military defense system in the world. 4 times. The laws of physics were suspended in New York City, with 3 high-rise, massively steel-reinforced, non-flammable skyscrapers all collapsing at free-fall speed directly into their footprints. Only 2 of them were hit by planes. How'd the other one come down? Did they ever explain that? No. But American people think, oh, there was a burning ember, and it brought down a steel building. There's never been a high-rise brought down by an airplane. I mean, when are people... The laws of chemistry were suspended, yes, when dozens of massive steel girders whose melting point is 2,750 degrees Fahrenheit were simultaneously and explosively destroyed by burning aviation fuel whose maximum achievable temperature, even when burned in 100% oxygen, is 1,517 degrees. Do the math. But this stuff doesn't matter. It really doesn't. 3 World Trade Center towers, each of which were designed to easily survive impacts by large passenger jets, were allegedly brought down by 2 airliners. None of the names of the 19 alleged hijackers were mentioned on the passenger manifest list. At least 5 of the alleged hijackers have been found to be alive and well and living in the Middle East. Some of them have been interviewed by the BBC. That's just the tip. That's enough. But that's the tip of the iceberg. And I remember one time when I was in 9/11 in a meeting with all the victims, when they were meeting with the 9/11 Commission and a number of congressmen, and they were battling out how they were going to put up the memorial. And they were really ticked off because they wanted it to be a memorial about the people who died. And it turned out to be something much different. If you go there, you'll see what I mean. And I had a chance to try an interview and get to some really serious questions with one of the commission members. And as I started to talk to him, he ran like a chicken with his head cut off. I was deterred by his aides, and he scurried off into an elevator, not wanting to answer one serious question. They know it's a lie. And they're going to keep lying to you, and it's up to you to get to the truth. And then, what are you going to do? There's not enough people now that really care. And as the years go by, there'll be less and less. Here's what's, an early scene at the Pentagon on 9/11. After the upper stories had collapsed into the small hole that was created by a flying object other than a Flight 77 Boeing 757. Note the complete absence of plane debris from the 127,000-pound aluminum plane. Its 125-foot wings and its 44-foot high tail, none of which were found inside the building either. And the hole looked like it was a missile hole. And people believe that a plane went into that. And then Shanksville. Now that I'll wait to the next half hour to get into. And then I want to switch over to that story about the Vatican. But we'll spend a little bit more time on 9/11. But it's looking back on this. I remember when I was really seriously researching this and doing a lot of stories, and I did a lot trying to contact people and the flight people, the people that the family members, and I found a stark difference between their reactions and the people, supposed victims, the family members that were of the victims of the towers, and I found some really interesting things, and I think the people on the planes. They were all set up. It's an incredible story. But I tried to look at it from that angle. Found some really, unbelievable things. Not to mention, all the other things. When you put this story together, the government story would be thrown out of court in a fair court if they came in with those facts. They wouldn't even see the light of day. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we are back. A little show on 9/11. Yes, day after 9/11. And it's been 16 years, and they have a story, and they're sticking to it. By the way, if you know, my 2 pal dogs that I had for, God, I don't know. I went out to my Max's grave site, and I said, hey, this is the first birthday you missed of mine for 10 years, you big lug. Where are you now? And then Moose, she missed. That's the first one, too, and she's been gone for since January. So for some strange reason, I got these 2 little puppies who were not doing very well, and I kind of rescued them, and I was going to find them a home. And I haven't had puppies in a long time, and big dogs are different than these puppies. Are like 2 or 3 pounds. They're not going to be. They're like the midget dogs of the world, right? And the dog world doesn't mind that I'm not politically correct and said midget, by the way. They're tiny, tiny. But anyway, I realized it's a chore. Wow. And they're smart though. They know already when I do my radio show, that's when they do the most mischief. They go, okay, he's on the radio now talking. He can't come and scold us. So let's rip apart everything and make sure we jump on the furniture right away. One of them's getting big enough to do that. And she's like, I don't know how. She's like a gymnast. She's like 2 pounds and she can get up on the couch already. And they are like, they know, they can hear me talking. They go, he's busy doing the radio show. That's what he does every day at this time. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up just to kind of like get away from this serious stuff. You hear him over there? Yep. But anyway, that same old story they gave every year after every year. And these news anchors that get paid $20 million a year to propagate these lies, I don't know how they look at themselves in the mirror. But I guess they have they're old. They have this thing like, we're creating a better world, and the only way to do that is to lie and kill people. Now, isn't that great thinking? How can you create a better world by committing crimes? It makes absolutely no sense. How can you create a better world by lying, by deceiving? I mean, have they had their heads examined lately? Or are they just so psychopathic, sociopathic, moneyopathic, idioticopathic, that they just either believe it or, by God, they're going to stick to their story and they ain't changing it. I wish it was the Old West and we could just take them into Judge Roy Bean's court and hang them tomorrow. That would be the best way. And the people in the saloon would all get together, and within a day we'd have them all hung, and that'd be the end of it. The bar would open at after the courtroom, and that would be it. So we're not in that world anymore, unfortunately. But anyway, back to 9/11. So we're looking at Flight 93. Now that was a crazy one. I even went out to that site. I mean, if a plane landed there, let me tell you this: I can win the 100-yard dash in the next Olympic Games. But Shanksville, Pennsylvania, right? Note the complete absence of bodies, luggage, or debris from the 127,000-pound aluminum plane just after the crash. Where did it go? Also note the absence of any rescue efforts, which is illogical, since emergency crews knew immediately that no passenger plane could have crashed into the tiny 10-foot by 20-foot underground mine entrance. The absence of a plane was confirmed by the journalist that was first on the scene. The memorial park on the site now is therefore a fraud and would be hard to take down and apologize for. Screenshot photo of BBC reporter Jane Stanley as she was live reporting on the collapse of the World Trade Center 7 a half hour before it actually imploded. Now, how could she do that? That was for BBC. Someone got in contact with BBC other than Mayor Rudy Giuliani had foreknowledge of the demolition, a certain sign of that something's up here, right? The photo of the World Trade Center complex owner, multi-billionaire Larry Silverstein. Remember how he manipulated that he made all that money on the insurance claims? And good buddy of our president, Donald Trump, by the way, explaining the intentional controlled demolition of WT7. He did. Last year, during the week leading up to the 15th anniversary of the dramatic controlled demolitions of the 3 World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7, every major television network and virtually every cable TV channel offered special presentations supporting the absurd and probably false Cheney-Bush conspiracy theories that 2 jet planes brought that down. Okay? Witnesses of the collapsing skyscraper also heard multiple loud explosions, disintegrating. We all went through this, but the television stations muted the sounds of the bombs in the footage that was replayed over and over again on the network stations. Sadly, NPR, MPR, WPR, GPR, SP, whatever they call themselves, some people previously respected them, have resolutely refused to interview any of the thousands, really, because they're paid by the government. Clear-headed, altruistic, truth-seeking scientists, architects, engineers, pilots, physicists, psychologists, chemists, theologians, researchers, scholars, philosophers, authors, journalists who have put together documentaries, written censored-out books, and amassed enormous amounts of court of law-ready evidence proving that the obvious controlled demolitions constituted criminal false flag operations planned and perpetrated by the sociopathic U.S. government and military insiders who have naturally maintained their silence concerning their treasonous actions. The perpetrators can be expected to keep mum until they die, or their attenuated consciences can no longer be stifled. Don't worry about the consciences. They don't have any. Let me take a drink here. And I ain't telling you what it is. Despite the fact that the enormous amount of scientific evidence proves, without a doubt, that the event was a false flag operation designed to justify the PNAC's perpetual war plans, our nation's most co-opted and most sociopathic, serially lying leaders have resolutely refused to acknowledge their complicity in the crime of the century. Wait till we get a bigger one. There'll be another crime of the century. Being involved in a cover-up of a crime is also a crime. Yes, but they're not going to ever. They've committed so many crimes. They're never going to be prosecuted for anything. Of course, those radio stations admittedly have a lot of co-accomplices, which include CEOs, owners, publishers, editors, and news anchors of every major television and radio station that continues to refuse to look at all sides of the 9/11 stories. Every legislator, except for, Minnesota Senator Paul Wellstone. They killed him, I believe. Every member of the Bush administration, every member of Obama, every member of Trump administration, each of whom, and deep into denial about the provable facts that they apparently refuse to examine and speak about, see no truth, hear no truth, speak no truth, seems to be the order of the day. And the one thing that I've always tried to do is, 9/11, you think they're going to tell the truth about 9/11? I can't get, if they won't tell the truth, they won't tell the truth about anything. I've tried to get the story of the Jesuit order out for years, and, it's never going to happen in the mainstream. There's too much money and power already controlled by these people. They can do what they want, the laws, the Constitution, nothing is in, nothing, they live by a different standard. And until we realize that, and most people will never realize it, and they'll go to their grave not realizing it, you'll get what they want to give you. And then prior to the 9/11 anniversary events last year, PBS TV station screened a new documentary that was produced specially for that anniversary. It was titled 9/11 Inside the Pentagon, and it was rebroadcast a total of 8 times over the week prior to 9/11/16. And they protest too much, Shakespeare would have said. The documentary was a conglomeration of patriotic disinformation that ignored the unassailable facts documented here that Mr. Coles is writing about. None of the hundreds of 9/11 truth documentaries were shown. PBS had obviously been co-opted by power entities. What do you think? PBS is truthful? No way. It was crazy. Now, when you look at all this stuff, Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon, impossible. There was no plane in that little hole. And of course, there was no plane debris lying around outside the concrete walls of the Pentagon. None of the thousands of photos taken at the scene showed any evidence of a plane. There were no passenger seats, no luggage, nothing. Something other than a Boeing 757 hit that building. And when you think about this, you've got a huge problem. This is worse than Nazi Germany. The provable facts documenting these crimes and subsequent cover-ups are not theories any longer. They are documentable facts. And just like I say, the Jesuit order and the Vatican are the head of the Vatican-led New World Order Illuminati, and it's not fiction anymore. There are facts. I've brought them out for years, and other people have too. These are facts that would hold up in a court of law. But you know what? Remember what my friend Sherman Skolnick said? The rarest species in the United States is an honest judge. And no matter what, they are documentable facts that would hold up in a court. No matter what these paid trolls, bribed politicians, and talking heads assert. Of course, true to Hitler, Stalin, Goebbels, truisms mentioned above, the 9/11 big lie has been told millions of times, easily drowning out the truth that is never given a chance at the microphone or podium. What really happened on 9/11 is obviously another one of the many taboo subjects that the military-industrial complex and the compliant mainstream media is terrified of even hinting at, even among the many supposedly truth-minded liberal investigative journalists that are on the staffs of some of these major outlets, but they're muzzled. They just work to get their paycheck. They either can't handle the truth or, fearing loss of employment, feel compelled to be feel compelled to be obedient to their paymaster, publishers, editors, and advertisers, and therefore censor out their reportage certain unwelcome truth. Fear is a powerful motivating factor, and the conspirators maintain the necessary silence concerning these cover-ups. Now, how much more can we really say about this? And, not have nightmares at night. Okay, Dr. Coles, he gets a little upset here. And what bothers me is the fact that the most Americans soon to be able to vote youngsters, who were either unborn infants, toddlers, and naive children back in 2001, have never been consistently exposed to the voluminous evidence that implicates their own government, their own politicians, their own multinational war profiteering corporations, their own FBI, their own CIA, and their own DOD, and the crimes and cover-up of the century. What is needed, of course, is complete transparency, which is also impossible to achieve in our highly politicized culture that is increasingly run by greedy elites who refuse to give up the power that they have so unjustly acquired when they use their unjustly acquired excess wealth by bribing so many of the politicians to do their bidding and bought off so many of the mainstream media outlets to keep whistle-blowing dissenters from telling unwelcome truths. And so there are too many brainwashed, ignorant, distracted, over-entertained, addicted, over-medicated, over-vaccinated, intoxicated, or I don't give a damn young Americans and their parents who are becoming increasingly unaware that it's nation's powerful sociopathic entities who are making the rules and controlling the airwaves are behind America's perpetual war machine and the economic destabilizations of weaker nations around the world. Looking and listening critically to the courageous whistleblowers will help to make these intentionally confusing events understandable. Okay, why don't we move on to that story about the Vatican? Okay, now this is a rather disturbing story, but what story isn't when you get to the truth about the Vatican and the Jesuits? And it's regarding the bodies of hundreds of children that are believed to be buried in a mass grave in Lancashire, according to an investigation that BBC News recently did. Now, this is nothing new to me. I covered the Duplessis orphan story, talking about how the Vatican and their orphanages work together with the government of Canada, the United States, Nazi doctors, the CIA, etc. What they would do is the nuns would would sign off that all the children were insane when they weren't. They'd ship them over to a laboratory or a hospital where they would be used as guinea pigs. And then many of them died, and then they were carried out in wheelbarrows and then buried in a hole, and they called it the pigsty. I happened to interview a guy whose job was to carry the babies in the wheelbarrow. It's not made up story, it's fact. It's the Duplessis orphans out of Canada. Then I covered the story of how the Jesuit order genocided Native Americans with their Native American schools in both Canada and America, and documented a story where a young Native American in the Northwest witnessed a priest burying a young child underneath the altar of a church. That has never ever been investigated, and she was traumatized as a young child. And when she tried to get the truth out as an adult, the police wouldn't investigate. So this is nothing new, but let's listen. Ben Robinson and Michael Buchanan wrote this story. So they're talking about these babies. The children were all residents of a care home run by Catholic nuns. At least 400 children are thought to be buried in a section of St. Mary's Cemetery in Lanark. The Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, which ran the home, refused to comment. I thought that people of God are supposed to be transparent. The research by the File on 4 program conjunction with the Sunday Post newspaper focused on Smileham Park Orphanage in Lanark. It opened in 1864 and provided care for orphans or children from broken homes. It closed in 1981, having looked after about 12,000 children over the years. A burial plot containing the bodies of a number of children were uncovered by 2 former residents of Smileham in 2003. Frank Doherty and Jim Kane discovered an overgrown, unmarked section of St. Mary's Cemetery during their efforts to reveal physical abuse, which they said many former residents had suffered. Of course, they were working on them just like they did in Canada, doing experiments. In 2004, the campaigners said the Daughters of Charity told them their records suggested that children had been buried in 158 compartments in the graveyard. Not that many children are. Children are supposed to live a long life, aren't they? They're supposed to be there to be nurtured. Why are they burying them in another pigsty plot? Frank and Jim, who both died earlier this year, believed, however, that the numbers were far higher, as the nuns had indicated their records were incomplete. The investigation by File on 4 and the Sunday Post indicates that they were right. At least 400 children are understood to be buried in the plot. Oh my God, I've got goosebumps. It's shocking, said Frank Doherty's widow, Janet. He had been trying for years to find a figure, and he didn't get anywhere. That's unbelievable. The death records indicate that most of the children died of natural causes. Now, isn't that easy? Yeah, and the records of all these Duplessis orphan kids who were falsely written down by Catholic nuns as being insane, mentally ill, were there too, and they still are on the record. So don't believe any of these records. The death records indicate that most children died of natural causes from diseases common at the time, such as TB, pneumonia, and pleurisy. Analysis of the records showed that a third of those who died were age 5 or under. Very few of those who died, 24 in total, were aged over 15, and most of the deaths occurred between 1870 and 1930. One of those believed to be buried there is Francis McColl. He died in 1961, age 13. His death certificate indicates he died from a brain hemorrhage. Oh, that happens to a lot of 13-year-olds, doesn't it? His brother Eddie spent decades wondering what really happened to Francis, his brother. At one point, he had heard he'd been struck on the head by a golf club, which now chimes with the evidence of the death certificate. But Eddie could find no trace of where his brother had been buried. It's ridiculous, he says. I'm not happy about that. Whoever is behind this, I hope they can live with themselves. You know something, Eddie? They can. Many allegations of abuse at care homes were also uncovered by File on 4 and the Sunday Post, including beatings, punches, public humiliations, and psychological abuse. This case mirrors the investigations into the Twa Mother and Baby Home, an Irish institution run by a religious order, where it is thought that nearly 800 babies and young children died and were buried in unmarked graves between 1920 and 1960. What happened at Smileham is one of the topics that the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry is examining. And do you think they're going to get very far when the Jesuits will control this investigation? 2 representatives of the Daughters of Charity gave evidence to the inquiry this summer in which they said they could find no records of any abuse, of course. It was a very pleasant place to live. In a statement, they said they were cooperating fully with Child Abuse Inquiry, and that they believed that was the best and most appropriate forum for such investigations. They continued, as Daughters of Charity, our values are totally against any form of abuse. Here comes the BS, and thus we offer our most sincere and heartfelt apology to anyone who suffered any form of abuse whilst in our care. Well, if you give apologies, you said you don't do abuse. Oh boy. Since 1855, there has been a legal duty in Scotland to register a death. Those death records are available for scrutiny. Now, how come they didn't register these? Didn't tell the brother Eddie where Francis was. After focusing on these people under 18 who had been resident at Smileham, the BBC and Sunday Post checked local burial records for Lanark, which today are held with South Lancashire Council. They found no evidence that the dead had been buried. Some children were sent to the home from other places across central Scotland, so spot checks were also made with a number of other areas. Just another day in the life of, checking out Vatican atrocities. Those are just the tip of the iceberg. If we really knew all the truth, it would be too long of a book to even write. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. They're a Satanist organization run by satanic, psychopath, sociopathic people who enjoy killing. I don't think there's any better way to put it. And they will kill as long as they are allowed to. So people, the only thing to do is really wake up. And I started the show with that phrase, will we wake up? Will we wake up? No. And it'll go on and on and on long after we're here. But at least we can try to let people know about it. That's right. We will do that here tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.